Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Sara-Jayne Slack, the founder of Inspired Quill, a socially and eco-conscious publishing house based in the UK. We are so close to releasing our new title, Edge of Ascension, which is the final book in the Resonance Tetralogy. Yes, you guessed it, after just over a decade since the first book, Legacy, was published, readers will be turning to the final page of this amazing story. So to talk about this series' ups and downs, how it's changed over the years, and what readers can expect from this final instalment, we have author Hugo Jackson with us. Hugo, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I hope the questions I've prepared will be exciting rather than exasperating.
I'm very sure they will be, and thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here again.
Fingers crossed.
And for still having me after all this time as well, and being very patient for me to get everything finished. I appreciate that very much.
Absolutely. I've been waiting to get my hands on this final book, so it's very exciting for me as well. So to start us off, tell us a bit about yourself and your work for those folks who don't know you yet.
Well, for folks who don't know Legacy or the stuff I do, I write a lot of furry fantasy sci-fi fiction. Some of it is like Legacy is a young adult series. I wrote some stuff that's for older audiences, but all of it, always, regardless of whether it's violent or not, it always has themes of hope and strength and perseverance and identity running through it as well. So that's something that's always been very intrinsic to me as a writer, and moving countries as well. So I live in the United States, obviously started in the UK, as you can tell from my voice. It's very interesting to see how worlds change and how you change in response to them, and that is something that I've tried to incorporate into my stories too.
Yeah, I love that, and I think long-time readers of your work will definitely be able to see that thread of evolution, if you like, through the different books and as the series progresses. Something that I really love that you just mentioned there was this idea of the different themes that you have in your work, and one of them being identity and things like that. I'd really love to talk a little bit about these themes in your Resonance series, and especially obviously in the final chapter, if you like.
Yeah.
This idea of the inheritance cycles. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So, Legacy, obviously being the first book, is called Legacy, and you find out why going through it, because Faria, the main character, has a lot of expectations that she was not even aware of by the time the story starts. And she then has to deal with the consequences of these being brought into a wider world, and all of these stories and histories being spilt out in a very consequential way into her life, and also the lives of everyone around her. Through as more of the action unfolds, there are a lot of other cycles of inheritance that become apparent through the book, not just through protagonists but also the antagonists as well, where these expectations and histories have caused conflict. There are some familial lines, there are societal lines, there are despots who have inherited their ancestors' hatred for those around them. There are heroes who have inherited willingly or unwillingly the need to protect others from these from a nasty fate, and they're very much thrust into expectations. And it's finding out that you have a purpose is one story, but finding out that you have to perhaps break the purpose that someone else intended for you in order to find a better life for yourself and those around you is a whole other kind of story. So Faria in particularly is dealing with the idea of what she has to deal with from the histories of her family, but also realizing that actually some of their methods were not the best and were not what the world needs now, even though it may have been at the time. The decisions that she has to make about changing her fate and changing the expectations, or not adhering to those, is a very pivotal one for how the world eventually not ends, but like how the story ends up in the final chapter.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think part of that as well is this idea of, you know, as you were saying, sort of the different things that the characters inherit, whether that be titles, expectations, characteristics as well. I think one of the really interesting things about this series is the fact that we see almost sort of two or three different sort of parts in time, right? So in the second book, for example, we go back to, you know, when Faria's father was cub, and you know, see how that unfolds, and also as the readers, we get a little bit more of an in-depth front seat, if you like, to this idea of inheritance and Faria's, you know, characteristics, because we can, you know, say things like, oh, that's definitely something Faria would do as well.
Yeah.
But she wasn't there, so she can't know the same level that the readers do. And I think that sort of dichotomy of we know something you don't know, is incredibly interesting, especially when we can see the thread of Faria's story between book 1 and the end of book 4.
Yeah, Ruin's Dawn was it's one of my favourite sections of the series, because it does go into why things are the way they are and why Aiden made the decisions that he did and how that affects Faria as well. It's very cathartic and also kind of heartbreaking in some way to know that these things, having been set in stone, could have been so different, but now that we are here having to deal with the fallout from it, but that if you have a good support network, and really at the beginning of the book, Aiden is Faria's only support network. You know, she only really has her dad and a couple of bodyguards. I mean, they're really cool, but you know, there's on a sort of a personal level, you really learn from the community that you have around you, whether that's family or found family. And you know, she is thrust into this world where I have forgotten what I was saying. So
I do like what you were saying there about, you know, family, found family, and this idea of community, because that's something, again, that's a really thick thread through all of the books for all of the different characters. And it's interesting how we can see the strength of character and what they do through the ties that they have decided to keep or cut or nurture. And this idea that the support of your community can manifest in different ways. You know, you just mentioned there about the sort of emotional side of things for Faria back in book 1 in Legacy, and maybe, you know, to start with, she didn't have, you know, much external emotional support, which is obviously why, you know, actions, what happens in book 1, trying not to say any spoilers, why she takes such intensity, I guess, to some of her actions. But also, you know, physical support. You mentioned the bodyguards, you know, even things like in the later books, through her inherited title, etc., the political support, or you know, things like that as well. It's definitely a thread with lots of ties.
Yeah, for sure, because the position that she's in as a protector, as a ruler, as a as a daughter, as a friend. They're all, some of them are very at odds with each other, because the political role is going to be very different from a familial one quite often, because the politics is when you're having to deal with people who do not have your best interest in heart, because the political group is not a community in the sense that it is like, when you're all working towards the same goal, and you have a political action of a community, that's very different to a political group that is outside the community, when you have a bunch of individuals that are all looking for their own aims. And that's kind of where it starts to kind of tear a little bit apart, and then going into the inheritance cycles, there's the same thing that her father had to deal with as well. It's very eye-opening for Faria to realize that, oh, my parents had to deal with this and now I do. This kind of sucks. Which when you have those expectations as a ruler, you think that your destiny is kind of inescapable.
Yeah. And what you were saying there about same nonsense, different generation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that a lot of people who maybe they're not active in any kind of political sphere, but it's something that everyone can relate to in different ways. So, and that's something else that I personally love about this series, in that it has, the main characters are all animals, there's magic, there's political intrigue, there's, mech stuff going on, all of this absolutely amazing, fantastical world building, which is such a strength of this world that you've created. But under all of those layers, it is a story about how individuals can affect change. In my view, anyway. That's my reading of it. Maybe it's not that deep, but
Well, I think anyone wants to save the world, really, and how you would go about that is all very individual. Everyone would do it slightly differently. And this is how Faria would save the world, or try to, and the struggles that she faces in wanting to have a peaceful life. And I think that, whether you are in that kind of higher strata, or if you're just, some fox off the street or whatever, you're just kind of, you want to be comfortable, you want to be safe. And when you realize that actually you were not, and perhaps may not have been, for the whims of like a couple of people who suddenly decide to come at you and level your city, it throws everything into chaos, and you really have to kind of find the measure of yourself when you go, okay, I want to save the world, but how do I save me first? Absolutely.
And I think that individual, not individualism, but that sort of individual level of responsibility, again, is a thread that I think goes through the whole series. Let's talk a little bit, moving on from that, but not massively. Let's talk a little bit about this idea of the characters having space to be vulnerable, and to have that, we were mentioning before about survivorship fatigue and things like that, before recording this. Talk to me a little bit about that. Why did you add that level of sort of the individual story when you have such a big, amazing, fantastical world, and why was that important for you to get across?
Well, since writing the first book, which I first finished it in 2010 and then was published through Inspired Quill in 2013, a lot has happened since then, and I think from my point of view, I am a lot more, like, I feel more tired, I feel more grizzled from having to deal with the constant news cycles, but not only the news cycles, but the political cycles and the chipping away of things of safeties and communities that you had felt were, when you're in a position of relative privilege, you take them for granted. But then, you get COVID and you are in a space that the government decides that they don't actually like you very much anymore. And you start seeing friends become more and more tired to the point where they, just can't do things anymore. Then you realize that as you write the stories, it felt kind of fallacious to not include the fact that Faria would get tired. To be trying to protect the world, not entirely by herself. She has people around her, but the thing is, the power that she has is one that nobody else has. She has this responsibility, and the weight, the burden of that feels very much like the way you can perceive yourself to have personal and individual responsibility for trying to save the world around you. And yes, you do have that. You can safeguard the space that is immediately around you, but you're limited by as much as you can do, and some days it is too much. And I think it was really important to show that, because a lot of young adult fiction is more about, I'm not saying that is necessarily the case, but there can be a tendency in young adult fiction to have heroes who keep getting stronger, keep getting more powerful, and they don't seem to suffer anything, except like a couple of aesthetic scars. But actually, the reality of perseverance is a lot more exhausting. It's darker in a quieter way. Like, you don't realize sometimes how much you have given to a fight, or even just sometimes just the energy to be in a given space, until you kind of look back up and you're like, oh, that's where I used to be. And your energy is gone, some friends are gone, and you just kind of it can break you a little bit. And I think that it's important to show that perseverance is not linear, and it's not without the consequences of the things that you experience as you go.
Absolutely. And I think, as you were saying, all of this has its place in young adult fiction, right? We need the hero that just keeps going and is inspirational in that way, and it's like, heck yeah, I'm going to keep training and doing what I can in my space, and whether that's for me, whether that's for a cause that I'm really concerned or passionate about, etc. But also the importance of these quiet moments and showing this vulnerability at the end of the day, and how Faria acknowledges the fact that she's tired as well. Because I think for a lot of us, and I say this as someone in her mid-30s now, which is still strange for me to say, so as someone in my mid-30s, being in a similar situation sometimes, where it's kind of, I've got to keep going, I've got all of this responsibility, and I want to make a difference, and I want to save the world, and all of this, but I'm really tired. I just want to curl up with a book and a cup of coffee and just, close the windows and do that today. But I can't, because I have responsibilities.
Yeah.
And I think there's something incredibly powerful and calming in reading any fiction, but I think, as you mentioned, sort of even more so young adult fiction, where that burnout, I guess, is acknowledged, and overcome in a lot of ways, but not in other ways as well. So, you know, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, despite the it's not all sunshine and rainbows, despite the overall arc being optimism, hope, you know, positive without being toxic.
Yeah, there's a very good saying. I don't remember how the whole thing goes, but it's it starts with hope has blood on her knuckles. And like, I think that's an important thing, is that hope is not this constant positive energy. It is picking yourself back up from the dirt and coming in for another round, because you know what it is you have to do and what needs to be done. But it is not without its bruises and its scrapes. And I think that showing that, especially when it feels like things just keep escalating, or at the very least like oscillating between a good news, a bad news, or like a tiny bit of good news and then more bad news, you know. I think it's very important to recognize that you have to get your head down in order to keep going and charge forward, and that it's probably going to hurt, but you know that the fight is worth having.
Absolutely. And it's that sort of active role as well. So it's funny you should mention that quote about hope, actually, because as you're aware, Inspired Quill will be publishing a book by James Webster, hopefully Ever After, in 2025. And I think that the last line of the blurb is something along the lines of, hope is not something you wait for, it's something you make on purpose. And I love the you know, the active role of that. And I think, again, throughout the entire series, but more so in this last book, there's that idea of actively, you know, the characters actively moving towards the ending that they want, whether for good or bad. And I'm not naming any names in terms of characters for this, but yeah, one of the themes is actually taking action, and not sort of sitting around waiting for other people to take action, or assuming that something will turn out because it's the just and right thing to happen, wherever that sits in the characters' minds, whether that's, you know, the consolidation of power, whether that's, you know, protecting people who can't protect themselves, whether that's retribution or justice for something that's happened in the past. All of these different elements kind of, you know, can come back to this idea of not being, if I use the phrase, not being plot driven, but being character driven.
I try very hard to. I didn't, when I first started writing, I didn't realize there was a difference. And then I started watching, funny enough, YouTube videos like Pitch Meeting are very good about telling you in simple terms, why do you do this? So the movie can happen, so the book can happen. And I think it's much more purposeful to have the characters making the decisions, for better or worse, because sometimes the decisions are going to be bad. But, you know, it is always, you know, very sincere when you do that. And I think it is that sincerity, whether in, you know, whatever decision you make, is to keep going regardless of that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's have a little bit of a discussion about the theme of power in certainly in the last book. So obviously there are lots of different types of power, and at different points in the book you expand on this idea of, you know, you've got the physical power and magical power with Faria's resonance. You have the power of community, through, you know, this idea of found family, for example. Also the power of that can sometimes be quite negative. So the power of, you know, being one creature against the multitude, or the power of loneliness, or the power even, I think, of ambition and how that negatively and sometimes positively impacts the different characters. And also, of course, political power, as much as we don't want to admit sometimes that's a facet. Certainly in the earlier middle parts of the book, that's something that you dive into quite a lot. Again, very character driven, but also how that political power can impact the power of community and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely, because the obviously when it gets to this point in the book, Furry is having to deal with inheriting that position of being like a representative in the Senate, and having to deal with people who want to prey on that and take advantage of her, not only her power in her position, but her powers in her physical, like her actual sort of more magical powers. There's a lot of different dynamics in terms of the perception of her as a younger girl, a younger woman in the Senate, the perception of her as a sort of some kind of magic trinket box. There's also the power of, or diminishing power of, seeing her as a tool for someone else's use. Like, you are the key to my success, in that I either have to subjugate you or convince you to be an ally. And obviously, when you have such an overarching political power that decides to exert itself over you, then suddenly that impacts the community that you have around you. When you have someone who can just say, arrest you all, then suddenly your community is deadlocked and like isolated from the resources it needs to thrive, or to like survive, or to fight back. But then Faria, having the powers that she does, is the single one who is often able to kind of circumvent that.
Sometimes quite literally.
Yeah, definitely.
Look, up and over, folks.
Yeah. And that's fun. That's a nice element to play around with, because if you did have special powers, magical powers, superpowers, I would be doing a lot more than I do right now. Because why would you not?
Absolutely. And we were talking about this before this recording, but asking yourself, certainly keeping within the themes of the book, asking yourself, what if, or why not, or this character could do that. Why have I not written this character can do that? And then suddenly, edit 7.4. This character is now doing this. Enjoy.
Yeah. It's kind of funny, because when you go through the writing process, you start with your like. Even though I say I want to keep things character driven, sometimes you just want a really cool scene. You're like, I have to construct a reason for this to happen. So, and that's when you start coming into like rules of power. Like, okay, you can't do this, or this is more difficult, or this is this. So, like the difference between, say, having elemental powers. Like, what would be the difference between manipulating sand and rock? Things like that. How do those changes affect what you can do? Or sometimes the character themselves is like, what, I never thought about doing that. And I think you can be honest. It's some of these things that people criticize, like, well, why didn't you do that? And like, I don't know what I don't know, and sometimes I don't think about the fact that. There was something that came up this morning. I can't remember. There was a Blue Sky post about something. I was like, really? That's that? And apparently people have known about it for a very long time, and I hadn't. So, so you can give your characters a lack of information if it makes sense, because we're always learning all the time, and sometimes that's going to be about weird, trivial stuff, or about ourselves that we didn't really know about until someone goes, "Have you thought about this?" You're like, "No," but I will now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for chatting to us about the different themes and how they correspond to the different books and the real world and not. And I think we are about ready to dive into some Q&A. How does that sound?
Yeah, let's do it.
Excellent. Fantastic.